Greetings! On behalf of YTM, welcome aboard. Enjoy your flight.
If you love to travel and want to stay in the loop with all the latest tips, reviews, and updates, be sure to hit that subscribe button and don't forget to like and share. We do appreciate the support. Join us on our flight today as we'll be flying from Charles de Gaulle Airport in Paris to JFK in New York City, and we'll be flying on Air France's 777-300 in business class. Air France currently operates several different versions of the 777-300. On this flight, we were aboard one of the older configurations, but that's okay. We were interested to see how it stood up to the test of time. We were especially looking forward to experiencing all the food and drinks on this flight. We started our journey today in the beautiful Sicily, flew to Paris, then onward to New York. And if you're interested in discovering hidden gems, great local spots, and travel tips around Italy, be sure to check out our Discovering Italy series, where we share everything you need to know for an unforgettable trip. Now let's take a little closer look at the booking for this trip. This booking was for 2 people in business class, first from Palermo to Paris, then from Paris to New York, with a little extended layover in Charles de Gaulle. We booked it during a credit card transfer bonus to Virgin Atlantic, using just 117,000 points and about $729 in taxes and fees. And I think that's a pretty solid deal for a couple of Air France business class tickets. Now let's take a quick look at the Air France baggage allowance. First, let's take a look at carry-on, where in business you get 2 carry-on bags as opposed to 1 in economy class. And in business class, you also receive a 6 kilogram bump in weight between your personal item and carry-on bag. If you're ever unsure about your baggage allowance, it's always best to check your ticket or contact the airline directly, as there's quite a few factors that can vary your baggage allowance. So it's always good to check. Now let's take a look at our Air France checked bag allowance. Depending on which type of business class ticket you purchased, you get 1 or 2 checked bags. We had 2. And other factors that come into play with your checked bag allowance is your status with SkyTeam or Flying Blue. Now, some people have asked us how strict is Air France with their baggage policy. For checked bags, generally they are weighed. For us, they have never weighed, measured, or questioned our personal or carry-on items, but your mileage may vary. Now let's talk about getting to the airport. For this trip, we had a layover at Charles de Gaulle, but since we've traveled to Paris before, we'll use that as our reference. There are several ways to get to the airport, depending on your needs, how many people, how much luggage, and of course your budget. We personally prefer the train. It strikes a good balance between economical and practical, and plus the ride is usually pretty straightforward. Let's talk about our check-in process. Since we were connecting from Palermo, we checked in there. Though if you're not checking bags, you can usually just check in online. And we did run into a few delays in Palermo, but you could see that in another video. And Air France was nice enough to send us this handy itinerary to follow, which we did. Now, I was a little curious why I couldn't get my boarding pass online. I had to pick it up in person, and I kinda had a feeling why. Then I saw it, the dreaded quadruple S. And if you know, you know. And if you don't, consider yourself lucky. It basically means that you're getting extra security screening at the gate. We've had it a few times, and it's not fun. But at this point, all I really wanted was to get to the lounge, relax, and have a drink or 2. Flying business class gave us access to the Air France Salon lounge, and here we are at the entrance to the elevator leading up to the lounge in Terminal 2E, I think. To be honest, navigating the terminals at this airport can be a little confusing. Inside, the lounge featured a sleek, modern design with a beautiful bar and a variety of food options laid out to choose from. And of course, they had a nice selection of wines and champagnes. It is France, after all. They also offered a solid range of amenities and services, but we're not entirely sure this lounge lived up to our expectations. Now, we'll get into all of that and more, plus how we got stuck and eventually out of the lounge elevator in our full review. And after leaving the lounge, we checked the departure board, and luckily, our flight was on time. And as always, we like to double check to make sure our plane is at the gate, and it was, which is usually a good sign. Now let's talk about the boarding process. Air France uses a fairly typical system. Pre-boarding starts with passengers needing special assistance. Then Sky Priority boarding begins. Zone 1 was our group, business class passengers and elite status members. Zone 2 followed, which included other Flying Blue and Sky Team elites. Then Zone 3, which is typically premium economy passengers. Followed by Zones 4 and 5. Yep, we've been there too. Well, the line started forming pretty quickly, and business class and premium economy passengers both followed the same path down the jet bridge. So as we started boarding, there was a bit of a wait, and the line was long and getting longer. But as I looked outside, I noticed it was starting to rain, and maybe that's the cause for the delay, but it didn't bother me as the line started moving, and all I really wanted at this point was to get to my seat, relax, and enjoy my transatlantic flight.
On behalf of everyone at Air France, we wish you a very pleasant flight.
Now let's check out our business class seat on the Air France 777-300. Let's start with the seat map. There's one row of La Première in the front, followed by two business class cabins, a smaller forward cabin and a larger one behind it, then a small premium economy section, and two economy cabins. We were seated in the smaller business class cabin, which we usually prefer. It tends to feel quieter and more private. Maybe it's just us, but we like it. The lie flat seats here were about 79 inches in bed mode, definitely long enough, though not the widest seats. Still, they were fairly comfortable. And since we wanted to sit in the forward cabin, we chose the best seats available at the time of booking, which were in row 6, seats E and F, and the fact that we were close to the galley and the restrooms really didn't bother us. Now here's a quick look at Air France's, I'd say unique and artistic safety video. Now let's take a look at our cabin, and as you can see, the cabin has a muted color palette and really does feel a little bit dated. Still, I wasn't going to let that distract me, and if you peek towards the front, you'll see the single row of La Première, well before they closed the divider. Well, welcome to seat 6E. My home for the next 8 to 9 hours. And here's a quick overview of the seat when we arrived. Now we're going to go into a lot more details about this seat, but first I think we should say a little hello to Lily. The seat itself looked decent, although a bit narrow as we mentioned. And here's a little view from our seat, facing forward. And since the business cabin was still filling up, let's get a quick peek at the window seat before our neighbor arrives. And yes, the all-important footwell. Now, it was a decent size, narrowing slightly at the end, but the length definitely made up for it, and I'd say it was fairly comfortable, and had storage underneath as well. And next to your seat, you had this decent sized surface, and I just put things here that I needed quick access to, and it also had a cup holder. Now, next to your seat, kind of behind you, you had this bright red storage compartment, and since it had a door, I put items in here that I didn't want flopping around during the flight. You also have your mirror in open mode and in closed mode. And next to that, you had your IFE remote, and we'll talk more about that later. And to the right, just above that, you had your reading light, and it was adjustable, as soon as I figured it out. Now, moving next to your seat, you had 4 button controls, and generally, I'm a button guy, and I do like a lot of buttons. Sure, this was basic, but it got the job done, so all good here. Now moving up next to your monitor, You have your coat hook that pops out. Now, I'm not exactly sure who uses this, but it's nice to have, and it is appreciated. Down below next to your seat, you had an AC outlet and a USB port in a somewhat convenient location. Nearby was your complimentary bottle of water, your menu, and of course, your 777-300 safety guide. Now let's look at your tray table. The tray table folded out pretty easily, and it really was a decent size. It can be used in half mode or in full mode, depending on your needs. And you had your IFE monitor, which we'll talk more about in the next section. And you had ample storage in the overhead bins above your seat. Overhead lighting was available, though there was no personal air vents, which didn't really bother us, as the cabin was kept pretty comfortable throughout the flight. And yes, there was some visible wear and tear, not surprising for an older product, but it didn't really bother us that much. Now let's take a look at the amenities offered on this Air France 777-300 business class flight. A few things were waiting for us at the seat when we arrived. First off, a warm towel to freshen up, which is always appreciated. And they also provided an Air France hanger, which is a nice touch. And the pillow provided, I'd say, was about average size, soft enough, and perfectly fine for what I needed. The matching blanket was large, comfortable, and on the thinner side, which I actually prefer, especially on these longer flights without air vents. Under a thick blanket, tend to heat up a little bit, so this worked out well for me. They also provided a pair of slippers, a small touch, but always a welcome convenience. Now let's take a look inside the bright red mystery storage bin, where we found a pair of Air France noise-canceling headphones. They were about average, definitely not as good as my Bose, but I used them throughout the flight, and they did the job. Now let's take a look at the amenity kit. There were quite a few items packed in here, although I apparently left the earplugs in the bag, so you won't be seeing those. First up, we'll take a look at the eye mask, which was pretty comfortable, had a nice soft feel on one side. They were easy on the eyes. The socks felt soft and pretty thick, although I didn't use them, I had my own. They also included an eco-friendly bamboo toothbrush and a pen. Never underestimate the value of a pen when traveling. Now for the care and beauty items, you had a travel-sized toothpaste, a firming and radiance boosting balm, and a light moisturizer. Just enough for a mid-flight refresh. Now let's take a look at the IFE system on this flight. We had a 16-inch touchscreen monitor. Not exactly the largest we've seen in business class, but more than enough for what we needed. The monitor and the interface were responsive and pretty easy to use. You can navigate by touch or use the remote. And there were quite a few language options, which is very convenient. Now, to adjust your screen outward, you would push this little button here, which actually did take a little effort. This way you could adjust your monitor slightly, depending on your seat mode. As far as entertainment, I'd say there was a decent selection. Movies, TV shows, music, games, and more. Now, I wouldn't compare this system to what you find on Emirates or Singapore Airlines, but I definitely found enough entertainment to keep me busy for a few hours in between my eating, sleeping, and drinking. And there were a few items that weren't quite working. When I tried to select cameras or maps, this message popped up, but all good, I had my movies. And now let's take a little look at the Wi-Fi on this flight. You had a few options available. First you had the Message Pass for connecting free to messaging apps, or you can upgrade to one of the paid passes if you really needed to be connected. We skipped the paid options, it's just 8 hours, I think we could survive, but we did sign up for the free messaging, and logging into the Wi-Fi was a fairly easy process. Now that we're settled in, we thought it was time to check out the bathrooms on board. Now let's look back at our seat map, and as you can see, there are 11 total bathrooms on this plane. But for now, I think we're just going to focus on the business class section, since that's where we're sitting. There were 3 bathrooms for business class, one in the rear of the smaller cabin and two in the front of the larger one, which I think is a suitable bathroom to passenger ratio. And here we are, bathroom check number 1. And I'd say this was about a couple hours into the flight. And as you can see, it was a bit messy at this point, but I really don't blame the crew for that. It's not realistic to expect a full refresh after each passenger. The bathroom itself was about average size, nothing especially large for business class, but it did include a baby changing table and a few amenities. But now I think it's about time to return to my seat and take a look at the food and drinks on this flight. Let's first take a look at the in-flight menu, which was both in French and English. Now I should mention that you do have the option of pre-ordering a meal, which I sometimes do in business class, but not in this case. And you could pre-order special meals depending on your dietary needs. There was also an a la carte menu option, which had a few extra items to choose from. And of course, being Air France, they had some nice wines and champagne, although the selection here was a little smaller than we're used to in business class. And shortly after we reached cruising altitude, we were served our welcome drink. And we both ordered champagne, of course, and had a nice little toast to a safe flight, wonderful company, and hopefully an amazing experience. We were also provided a complimentary bottle of water, followed by this small box of crispy, cheese-filled crepe snacks. They were actually really tasty. It was a nice surprise. Then came out our first official drink service. Well, other than our welcome champagne, of course. I went with a French white wine. Not too sweet, just the right touch of dryness. It was simply delightful. Next up was our summer vegetable appetizer and our shrimp starter. First up, let's take a look at our summer vegetables with mint, cheese, and black olives. I'd say it was okay, fresh but not particularly memorable. Then came the tablecloth, signaling the start of our main meal service. Next up was our shrimp starter, and this one really stood out. It was served with a vinaigrette and really paired nicely with the butternut squash and carrot salad. And I did enjoy the fresh bread with olive oil. It rounded out a solid start to the meal. So now it was time for our main dish. Me and Lily originally both selected the fish, which was a cod dish. But I was approached a little while later and informed that it was no longer available. I had to select something else. So then I decided to go with the chicken dish. And to be honest, I wasn't really thrilled with the sudden change of events, but I tried to stay optimistic. Lily's cod was served first, and it was delicious. The fish was tender and had a lot of flavor, and since her dinner was so delicious, I was greatly anticipating mine. But things got a little odd. Lily had finished her meal and they cleared her tray before I even received my dinner. I have to say the service on my side of the aisle was a little hit and miss throughout the flight, but eventually they did bring out my chicken with couscous, and unfortunately it just didn't measure up. The chicken was a little dry and lacked flavor. I took one bite, that was enough. And what made it a little frustrating was that several passengers around me still got the cod, so I'm not sure if something was missed or was just a little bad luck. Well, after that, we were served a cheese plate, which I really did enjoy, and where Lily's side of the aisle was offered more bread with their cheese, our side was not. I had to specifically ask for some, but the flight attendant happily obliged. At this point, I felt like I needed a proper digestive, so I went with the Calvados, and it was super smooth. For dessert, we had a choice of sorbet, cheesecake, or chocolate cake. I went with the chocolate cake, and it paired nicely with the Calvados, and I really did like this little cake. It was light, not too sweet, and just the right size. Now Lily went with the sorbet and almanac combination, which she thoroughly enjoyed. Both of our desserts were exquisite, so compliments to the pastry chef. Now it was time for bathroom check number 2. About 3 hours after our first check, when things, well, weren't so great. This time, the bathroom was in much better condition. The crew had done a really nice job. The bathroom was clean, fully stocked, and overall, a much more pleasant experience. Nicely done, Air France. And as they dimmed the lights in the cabin, I thought it was about time to head back to my seat. Reclined it into full lie flat bed mode, got comfortable, closed my eyes, and about 2.5 hours later, I was up. For me, that's actually a pretty solid rest for a flight. As I woke up, the crew started serving the final meal for the flight, what they refer to as a light snack. Unfortunately, this one didn't quite work for us. The flavor combination on the brioche just wasn't our thing. Well, maybe it's just our taste. The orange and pink grapefruit wasn't our favorite either, but I did enjoy that cake in the corner. And soon after our meal, we started our descent into New York and on to our next adventure. Now, some final thoughts on our Air France 777-300 business class experience. Now, even though we started off with a slight delay, probably due to the rain, we ended up arriving a bit early, which was nice. Now, the service and food were definitely hit or miss on this flight, and flying an older product didn't help. With that being said, we've flown Air France's business class before and actually had a really enjoyable experience, so we're chalking this one up to more of a blip than a pattern. And yes, we would absolutely fly Air France business class again. We hope this helps you the next time you plan on flying Air France. Safe travels. If you enjoy traveling and like our videos, please subscribe, share, and like. We really do appreciate it, as it does help support the channel.